Hi, my name is Becky Jennings, and this is the Responsible Parenting Podcast. I give you the transformational tools to stop reacting to your children in the moment and start responding with intention. Before we dive into the episode, I want to share my free guide to managing our kids' meltdowns. We know that meltdowns are normal, but they still suck and can be ridiculously triggering. This 4-step free guide will help you break the cycle of reactivity and help you get through the meltdown without snapping yourself. Don't join your kid in the tantrum. Grab my free guide and learn how to manage meltdowns like a pro. Head to responsablepparenting.ck.page/meltdown, or just go and click the link in my show notes and get your guide today. Okay, let's get to the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Responsible Parenting. My name is Becky Jennings. I'm your host, and today I have two beautiful guests, which I am so excited. Sari Knight and Sasha Knight. I have known Sari since well before we both had even the thought of children, and I have had the pleasure of getting to know Sasha over the last couple of years during the pandemic, playground, play dates, all of that stuff. And I really wanted to bring this mother and son team on because they have shown me a lot. They've been a placeholder in my life of like the possibilities of what can be. She has shared with me as she's like witnessed my son's kind of on the surface problematic behavior. And she's been like, listen, little Sasha was like this all the time and look at him now, right? So it's just been this really beautiful journey of being able to talk about like the behavioral stuff that trigger us and how she was able to move through this with compassion, empathy, kindness, and had a real focus on how she wanted to raise her children. And when you hear from Sasha, you will be like, oh, thank God. He's just such a wonderful child. He's almost 15 in about a month. And what you'll hear from him is just this maturity, this kindness, this depth. And I think you'll be really relieved to know that when you do parent in such a beautiful way with empathy, kindness, generosity, curiosity, that it actually works. And the outcome is so much richer and stronger and connected and collaborative. So welcome. I'm so happy to have
Thank you so
here.
much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I'm really excited. All right, so let's dive in. Sasha, where do you fall in the 4 sibling range? What number are you?
I'm the second one. I'm the older middle.
Okay, and you're
Yeah.
almost 15.
And I'm almost 15.
Okay.
I have an older brother and 2 younger sisters.
Amazing. All right, so talk to me about like if you remember kind of the chaos of elementary school age, or how did you feel in your body? Do you even remember what was going on? Kind of talk about little Sasha.
I don't remember that much, but what I do remember is that, it just didn't feel very good. I was like, it just felt like dysregulated all the time. And I think that like my teachers would always they'd always talk down to me and be like, no, you're not supposed to do that. And that's bad. And then I just was like, oh, I'm bad because they're telling me I'm bad.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then with friends.
And then with friends, my friends would tell me that I'm weird and that I should stop
Too
doing
much.
things. Yeah.
Physical. He would pick people up on the
Yeah.
playground. He would like 2 people would be talking.
I'd run
He'd,
up
like,
behind
come
people and I'd come and be like, what are we talking about, guys?
And then he was a biter.
I stopped biting when I was like
6,
7.
7. Older.
We're like 6 or 7.
Yeah.
No, but I
So-
didn't bite my friends. I only Keaton. Oh, okay. I bit one person when I was 6.
Yeah.
And then I stopped. I was good.
That's so funny.
Okay, I bit one more person after that, and then I stopped.
He was a runner when he was in preschool. So like the second the door would open, he would like race out to like basically like the parking lot, and the teachers would all freak out.
Yeah.
And
typically these are the behaviors that
Correct.
we would punish away. We would be really strict and rigid around. These behaviors trigger us as parents and bring around a lot of fear of like, oh my God, if my child is doing this now, like I can't even imagine what the future is going to look like. It can create a lot of fear and chaos for parents. Did you feel like you had those moments that you've kind of felt triggered in these pockets of time?
Oh my God. Yes. I remember I used to say, I would like literally have a mantra to myself. I would say, God never gives you more than you. I'm not a religious person, but I just had this like moment where I would just say, God, because I knew this slogan. It was like, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. God doesn't give you more than you can handle.
Yeah. So you're like, I know I can handle this.
I can do this. I
Yeah.
can do this.
Yeah. And basically, I mean, what you just did is you're basically regulating your nervous system during that process by speaking out loud, like the goal that you want, right? You're like,
For
I can
sure.
actually handle this. You were like
Yep.
unknowingly speaking it out loud so that you could sort of like grow your window of tolerance in those moments.
Yeah. And I mean, there was times where I would literally say to myself, it's too much.
In those situations when, say, you're running around the classroom or whatever class, or you bite somebody, how did you, Sari, how did you approach Sasha? Like, did you get in his face, scream at him, tell him he wasn't allowed to do that, punish him, put him in timeouts? Or what was your approach to managing these behaviors?
So I was never supportive of timeouts or punitive ways of parenting. I always believed in parenting through connection and empathy. That was just something. I was a big Dan Siegel person. I loved all of his stuff. And so I read all those books. And I kind of always took in consideration all of the circumstances around him. So I'd be like, okay, has he slept? Has he eaten? Where are we? Is the environment stimulating? How do I feel today? Like in my moment, you know? So I really did the work of like kind of taking in my environment, figuring out how I was feeling around in response to him, brought the focus to myself to be able to try to regulate myself before I ever even engaged him. And really like only really sort of reacted big when there was a safety concern. I felt like if he could hear my loud or strong voice around safety issues, he will know that those are big deals. But like if I was to freak out all the time,
it blurs the
then
line.
he was such like a black and white kid that like I wouldn't be able to get that messaging across unless I was really clear like that I was calm most of the time except when he was in danger.
Yeah.
So I did have a hard stop when it was like a danger situation, right? And that's when I would have a strong voice and that's when I would take up space. Those are my concerns because of the physical, kid who had like major impulse issues. Like, he put himself at risk a lot. And so in parking lots, and would just run out and he was a runner. So
Runner, I was a runner.
he was a runner.
He's
So I had to be really strategic about when I asserted myself with him.
Yeah.
And he was also very sensitive and reactive. So if I were to kind of get in his face or something, that would only exasperate a situation. And I knew that about him.
Yeah, it really would.
Yeah, Sasha, why don't you share your perspective of that too? Like when your mom would come in with like a firm voice of like, stop or whatever it was, was that you were like, oh, okay, now I need to pay attention. But in the other moments, like when she responded in a more gentle, compassionate way, how do you think it would have been different if she was constantly yelling at you or being more punitive?
I think like what she was saying, I would not have understood that what I was doing was I would have thought that everything I do is like whatever, like she always does that with me. So it's just like whatever, just the way that she talks instead of it being like, oh, she only does that when I'm doing these things. And then I was like, oh, that means and I can see like the similarities between them and I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm not supposed to do those because those obviously she really thinks that those are not okay compared to other things that I do.
Yeah.
And I think also like when you're dysregulated, I think the reason that I did have behavioral issues is because I was just overstimulated a lot. And so when you're overstimulated and dysregulated, like you do not want to be yelled at. And I think it would have made it much worse in the end. Because I have friends that were like that and they were older, like 13 now, but I'm not friends with them anymore. And they were like 10 at the time. And their parent would always yell at them. And they also had sensor issues and were constantly dysregulated. And it was so bad because they would freak out and it would create such a much bigger conflict than I think it had to be.
Yeah. Yeah, because then it creates a whole pattern of storylines about who you are as a person, right? It's like, oh, she's yelling at me because these things are bad. And because it's so infrequent, you can see like, oh, those things I was doing were bad. But if it was so constant and it was all the time, it was like, okay, so everything I do is bad. So I just must be bad.
Yeah.
Well, I also really believe in giving breath to things and taking a step back and observing before you just like jump in with a fixed solution. Because I think kids are a lot more resilient and kind of good problem solvers if you give them space to figure it out.
Totally.
And I think and I think it's okay for your kids to fail. And because that's where the growth is. Conflict often leads to growth, right? Like if you're saying something's in conflict, it gives you an opportunity to be able to say, okay, let's explore that. Let's be curious about it. Let's figure it out and overcome it, as opposed to avoiding it or sort of disciplining it away. I think it's good to allow for it, allow for the feelings and allow them to come out. And when you're on the other side, I read an article once when I was in the early days of my parenting journey. I read an article about tantrums, and it was and the visual that they gave was like a train going through a tunnel, and you just have to let it sort of go through the tunnel, like let it have its course. And then when you're on the other side and the train exits the tunnel and things have shifted energetically, you're able to sort of like observe that and then be there for that. And I think it's just like meeting your kids where they are along the way. It's something that was like I always read about and I always really liked. And as the kids have gotten older, I've really given them a lot of space to make decisions and to employ critical thinking and problem solving, and we talk through stuff, and they have a seat at the table of every conversation that we're in. But I'm still mom, right? Like I still am their parent. I'm not their friend. I'm their parent. I am their friend, but I'm their parent first.
Yes, first and foremost. And
my kids know that, and there's a certain safety for kids to know that there's a boundary, right? Like, and I think boundaries are good in parenting, but they don't always have to be considered punitive or negative. The boundaries, they can be loving and supportive and create an environment where kids I can say to them, hey, tell me more about that. I want to know more about that. That sounds really hard. I want to hear that. Instead of me saying, well, why don't you do this and do that? And why don't you tell this person that then? It's like you every mom wants to fix their kids hurt. It's just
we don't want to see them in pain.
Never. It's like my mother used to say, you're only happiest as this is such like an old school attitude, which I think is funny because it's so different now, right? Because parents have so many more healthy boundaries than they used to. But parents used to say, my mother used to say, oh, you're only as happy as your least happy child. And I was
Which is kind of true because it does take the energy, that's where
you can hold your own happiness and have and your own set of boundaries, and then your child can be unhappy. It's okay.
It's okay.
You don't have
and
to
I
be
think
as miserable as your
totally. And I think we're actually learning that for the first time in parenting is like how to just hold space for the feelings versus take them on as our problem to fix.
It's really important.
It's really important. Sasha, can you speak to how that felt growing up? Like where you had a parent, both parents, I know, talk to you with curiosity, help you kind of get to your own conclusion versus trying to fix things for you all the time.
Oh, okay. I really, really like that question because I think that I see that today about being independent, that if they really wouldn't have talked to me and they kind of just would have told me what to do, or like, oh, this is how you must feel, or oh, so you should do this then if you feel that way because that's going to fix your problem. They made me figure out how to fix the problem, which has benefited me so much now that I'm older because now I have way more problem solving skills than my other peers. And I also think, again, like they gave me a seat at the table and got my opinion, which again, critical thinking skills, because now I have those and I can think for myself. And it's not like, oh, because I think that I've noticed within my peers that their parents do a lot for them. And so they don't think for themselves fully. And I think that I do that a lot more than other people my age.
I think a chronic issue with parents today is that they don't trust their kids enough.
That one's for sure.
So like in my generation, I'm Generation X. we were ignored, right? And the parents knew, and they were the authority. And then they had this very assertive way. And then we were completely ignored. So we were neglected a lot. So it's interesting. It was like these extreme sort of modes that kids of the 80s feel like, right? So I think I was sensitive to that. I didn't think that was effective as a parenting skill, and I didn't want that for my kids, right? So the idea that a 14-year-old doesn't know themselves, I think it comes down to trust. And I don't think even a 6-year-old, I don't think adults trust children enough to know what's best for themselves.
They don't.
Yeah.
And I think the more space you give your children, and start young, right, for making choices and decisions, and trusting those choices, decisions, because they know, and telling them to trust themselves. You know yourself, what works for you.
Yeah.
And then they can get an inner compass to
Mhm.
define what works for them. And then they can use that throughout their lifetime. I found that was the best, strongest parenting solution for our family. Like
Yeah.
that's what worked best for us. And I think because of it, my kids are very resilient. And I want to just say, like, my kids have made a lot of mistakes, and I haven't saved them when they've made choices. And I've allowed them to fail. And
But
it's
they
been
always know they can come back and you're safe. You know what I mean? It's like they
for
always know
sure.
that they can come back and workshop it with you and figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But accountability is also important. I
totally.
don't want to let them off the hook all the time. They need to know that if they make choices that aren't good choices, that they have to be accountable for those choices, because that's how life works.
Yeah, it is how
Yeah.
it is how.
And I'm not going to excuse away bad behavior.
Well, because also this is more when you're a teenager, but
Yeah, this is
especially
all stuff for older kids.
when you're my age, you're not, as a parent, you're not raising a child. Like you're for the constant evolution of a child, you are creating an adult. That the end goal is like a sufficient adult. And so if you treat them like a child when they're my age, then they're not going to be sufficient adults when they're older.
Yeah.
They're going to need someone's guidance their whole life.
Yep. Sasha, I'd
Yeah.
love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because you've mentioned some of your peers and how their parents maybe are more authoritarian, or they kind of do things for them. In terms of, like, I don't want to say the word respect, but in terms of the way that your friends view their parents, are they just kind of like, ugh, I have to deal with my parents, or my parent, or are they engaged and want to be with them and connected with them? And I guess I kind of am curious, like, I keep hearing feedback that my approach doesn't teach the child to respect the parent. Like, coming to the table with compassion, curiosity, kindness, empathy, showing up for feelings, embracing possibilities. That's not teaching a child to respect the parent. Meanwhile, I think it's the complete opposite. I think it creates such a level of kindness and caring and respect. So you've been nurtured your whole life in this capacity, and your friends have been nurtured in a different way. I'd argue to say that you probably respect your parents more than your friends
Oh, for
do.
sure.
Can
Yeah.
you speak to that level of, like, how your friends talk about parents?
Yeah. I think also, like, they taught us that respect is given. And because they respect us, we respect them. And I've noticed something about my friends, that it's not that they don't like their parents. They don't have like a total like respect for their parents in the same way that I do. And I think that's because they resent them in a lot of ways. Not necessarily resent them, but they just have like they suck because they don't understand me.
Mm.
And I think
So a lot of the respect feels like it comes from almost a mutual understanding and the
yeah.
desire to understand.
Oh yeah, totally.
What Sasha was trying to say is that, like, just because I'm his parent, I have to earn his respect.
Yeah, that is what I was saying.
Yeah.
No, and I'm not saying that like there's definitely respect there already because you're my parent, and it shouldn't be like even if your parent, if you don't agree with what they do, you should still respect them because they're your parent and they probably know better than you because you're a kid. And but in the same way, if someone, but that made me think, oh, if someone treats me badly in a friendship, why should I be friends with them?
Yeah,
Because they don't respect me. So why would I respect them? Why would I want to stay in a relationship with them?
So what
It's
you've
about-
essentially learned to wire is like respect and love and connection versus respect and fear. You
well,
know what I
and
mean?
worth.
Yeah.
Like he is worthy of my respect. I am worthy of his respect.
It's not just like, oh, she deserves my respect, but I don't deserve hers. I think
Right.
I noticed that in a lot of like parent-child relationships is that the respect is automatically there for the child to the parent, but the child does not, I mean, the parent does not have to respect the child.
And by the way, it is a lifetime of this. It
A
is
lifetime of earning the respect
of
back and forth.
earning each other's respect
Oh, and
Totally.
throughout. And that is what, trusting, holding space,
Mhm.
compassion, empathy,
Mhm.
really seeing and listening to your kids.
Yeah.
And really being present with them.
Yeah.
And grateful. And recognizing the delight and the joy, no matter how hard it gets, in any circumstances that you're in. If you pull out, parenting is, at the end of the day, can be extremely joyful. And your relationship with your children is can be one of the most satisfying relationships that you could ever possibly be in.
Yeah.
So I'm fortunate that I feel this way. Like, I delight in my children. I want to be with them. I love them all so much, and they're so different from one another and also unique and special. I feel connected equally to each of my children.
Mm.
And I'm not saying parenting is always easy.
No.
A lot of work, but all meaningful relationships are a lot of work.
Mhm.
Anything that you care about, anything in life that you invest your time and energy into that you care about, it requires work.
Yeah.
So I think there's a level of acceptance there to say, this is the hardest and best thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Like people have told us, like when we're together, just told her, when she says that she homeschools 3 of her kids, or at least homeschools 2 of them fully, and then one of them goes like to hybrid, they're always like, what? No, I could never be with my kids all day. And I'm like, geez. Like
Yeah.
you could never be with your kids all day? I
Right.
think that's such a weird way to think about your kids, because obviously your kids are gonna push back against you if you literally say that you could never be around them all day.
As we know, it takes a village to raise our children, but more and more, we are doing the entire job on our own. And that stops today. I have created a parent community app focused directly on giving you essential support tools. The Response Able Parenting Community Group is available now. In this community, you will have more parenting strategies right at your fingertips. You'll have direct access to me and my coaching every month in our live Q&As, where you can bring your burning parenting questions and get my real-time support. I will host monthly exclusive workshops, facilitate weekly skill building exercises, and more. This space is designed to meet you where you are at on your parenting journey. It's a judgment-free zone with parents and caregivers who are learning and growing right alongside of you. For less than $1 a day, you will have access to exclusive parenting content and coaching. I cannot wait to be a bigger part of your parenting journey. Head over to responseableparenting.com to join today. Enter promo code podcast to receive $10 off your first month. That's PODCAST for $10 off your first month.
Yeah.
Sasha, I'd love to hear from you, like maybe a couple takeaways that have really impacted you on the way that your parents have raised you. Like maybe a couple things that have allowed you to feel totally safe with becoming whomever you want to be. And also like how you felt it helped you grow into this mature, really aware teenager.
I want to point something out. I think that I was always like, I'm not saying that I was always mature, because my behaviors were not mature behaviors, but I always was like more connected to adults than I was to kids. And I think part of the reason for that is because people always were like, oh, you're weird. And so I just like immediately connected to adults. But I think the reason I felt safe with adults is because they made me feel safe. And I was like, oh, kids aren't very nice to me. but I feel safe with my parents, which means that there are some safe adults that I can feel safe with too. Instead of like at school, like the teachers at the playground, that I would always talk to them, and I would just that they were like I had other friends, but I just was like I like talking to them better than the other kids at the playground.
When do you think the switch was from like understanding that the behavioral things that again are so common in children, like these are normal children behaviors that have been kind of like forced to be suppressed. Now we're allowing them and everyone's like freaking out a little bit more and trying to again punish and shame these things away. At what point do you think you were like, oh, I don't actually have to do these behaviors in order to meet my needs, feel seen, feel heard, all of that? Like, was there a shift for you that you remember at all? Or was it just like a growth process through time?
I think it was just a growth process through time. And I still have moments where I don't freak out like I used to, but I do. Like I get overstimulated and I freak out. I think that that's a natural occurrence. Like when you have these issues when you're younger, you have them, but they just manifest in a different form when you're older. And that's definitely the case. Like I'm not like I don't bite people anymore. Obviously, I hope I won't bite people anymore, and I do not. I think rock climbing was a really big asset for me because I started that when I was 7, and that's kind of how I decompress, and I really like it. I think just having an environment that was a personal sport but also had a competitive aspect to it. And it's like a very full body sensory experience. And so that's kind of how I got out what I like my discomfort physically.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the word compassionate parenting because I think parents don't understand what that really means, compassionate. Yeah. And I think for me, the way I interpret it is that you give your child the benefit of the doubt. Like you're not always going into a situation thinking your child's doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. You actually are like, well, tell me more about what's happening so I can understand the circumstances so I can see like where you're coming from more. Because sometimes kids have a really good explanation of why they did the behaviors they did if you ask them.
Yes.
Right. But so many parents, most of the time, but so many parents are so quick to just jump and discipline and they have no context.
Yep.
And I think that context is super important because I think kids can tell you like, oh, I got, I bit that kid because she was actually sitting on a beanbag and I was trapped underneath it.
That was a story once that I think, okay, when I was like 7, right?
6 or 7.
6 or 7.
Yeah.
And I was sitting on a beanbag and this girl.
We were at a play date for Ethan.
Yeah. She was like a year older than me. She put the beanbag on top of me and she sat on it. And I was like, get off of me. And she wasn't. So I bit her arm. And so.
Because he was trapped under it.
It wasn't like I just bit her for no reason. Like there was a very valid reason. I'm not saying that you should bite people.
Right. But what would have happened normally is you would have been punished for biting. But Sari, you were like, obviously the biting is not appropriate. We can't do this. And I'm curious as to why.
Correct.
Yeah, it's like approach.
Like I always say, like, what happened?
Yes.
I always ask what happened before I give any kind of discipline or anything.
Because the girl, she screamed and she freaked out. And I think that some parents would go to immediate, like, what did you do?
Of course they would. That's what parents do.
And also because I had, a history of hurting people. So it was, oh my gosh, what did you do? Why did you do that? But instead you're like, what happened?
What happened?
Yeah. Because it's so easy. And I noticed the tendency even amongst like with myself, because Hunter has, he has sensory seeking challenges. He's like you were saying, like he goes over, he picks people up, he holds too hard, he squeezes too tight. He's very physical. He's very impulsive. He has behavioral processing challenges, and it's so easy to immediately assume that he's the villain. He's the perpetrator. He's the one doing something to somebody else. And it's this behavioral personality thing that I need to eliminate or eradicate. But what you're saying is it's the process of showing up in curiosity. It's the process of showing up with understanding that this might be a behavior, but it's not who my child is.
No. And it's also understanding like what his intention was. Like,
totally.
What were you thinking? I always used to say to my kids, like, what were you thinking when that happened? Because then it teaches them critical thinking.
Yeah. What was going on in your body in those moments?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just try to understand the circumstance, the context, the circumstance, why.
Yeah.
I was like, because then I could understand like if it was just like acting out. And then you address that, we don't just bite people. That's not appropriate. That hurts people's bodies. And you can create space for explanation. Listen, your kid's gonna listen. It's been proven that, first of all, a dysregulated parent can never regulate a dysregulated child.
Right.
That has just been proven medically. Okay. The second thing is, if your child is dysregulated, you cannot, it literally shuts down their ability to communicate in their brain, the part of their brain for them to communicate. It literally shuts it down.
Yeah.
So when you're like, use your words when your child is screaming and crying, they physically cannot access their words because of the way that their brain is structured. So developmentally, I think that's another thing. It's really important to meet your kid where they are developmentally. You cannot have expectations for your child of a 10-year-old when they're 6.
Yeah.
They'll
And yet
never
we do it
meet that
all the
10.
time. And yet we do it all the time.
We also don't let our kids have their feelings. Stop crying. Don't cry. Let your kid cry.
Yeah.
Let it out. Let it out. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right? You can deal with the reason later. I feel like parents are like always having to feel like they have to be right.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's about like, oh God, you're really in pain right now. That sucks to me. And then you could deal with the circumstances after.
Yeah, we have to constantly ask ourselves, is it more important to be right or is it more important to be connected to my kid? I constantly have to be like, is me proving this reason, justification, this scenario, this behavior, is it worth me doing that? Or can I just sit here in the present moment, allow the feelings, and then talk about it when we're both
so
regulated?
much more effective for your child because the truth is that they're not capable physically to talk about it at that moment. They're not capable to reason. Their brain, where the portion of reasoning gets shut down when they're dysregulated.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it shuts down reasoning, it shuts down communication. So it's
to ask your child to reasonably communicate with you, it's just not going to happen.
A 6-year-old, when you have adults who can't even manage that task, well, I mean, it's not reasonable. So you have to have reasonable expectations for your child for where they are developmentally too. I mean, that's a big piece of it.
I think when you also teach your child to push down their emotions, that's just what they're going to do when they're an adult.
Absolutely.
They also tend to lash out in anger.
Yeah.
Because those feelings don't go away. They're still on the surface. And then suddenly they'll say, why is my kid crying over the littlest, silliest things? Well,
it's because they've never been taught how to regulate those feelings from the jump.
And I also think it's important for parents, for children to learn from watching you. I know that's like, oh, they learned it from watching you, Dad, that like commercial in the 80s. But like, there's some truth to it. Like, if your kids see you blow off the handle all the time, they're going to model that behavior to you, you know? Like, but if they can see that you're taking a moment to breathe, to pause, you know, I used to always laugh when Scarlett was like 2 or 3. I've historically been like a daily meditator, even for 5 minutes, right? I just do, you know, I sit and sometimes I sit and like just treat chi mudra or whatever it is. And I just sit with myself, right? And so when Scarlett was like 2 or 3 years old, I saw her like sitting like this with her legs crossed, right? And I was like, oh my God, I didn't tell her to do it. She saw me do that. And then she did it, right?
I know. I love it. I love it when Trey does that. He'll go, shh, guys, I meditate.
Yeah.
And he'll sit and he'll close his eyes and he'll meditate.
And you really do, as your kids grow older, you like hear the things that you say. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to be so mindful of what I say because my kids are absorbing it. I'm not saying I'm the all and be all, right? Like they learn from a lot of different places, not just from me, but I'm just saying like, it's, I will say one more thing. I do think that is also a kind of a pit for parents that they think that their kids are learning everything from them. You're like one small piece in their giant influences of development. Like there's so many different factors that go into a whole person. You really don't have that much power over your children. Like you think you do, parents, but you don't. Your parents your kids are on their own journeys, their own paths of development, and you are there to support that path, right? You're not there to define it, right? Or to define them. And so many parents think that their job is to define their children. No, your children came into this world with their own spirits, their own souls, and they have a journey and to fulfill. And sometimes that journey involves pain and sometimes it involves suffering, like all of us have gone through, and all of them will go through. You cannot protect your children from suffering. it is part of life. It's what you do is you want to give them the skills to be able to find the resiliency to handle suffering when it comes into their past. And I think that's something that I've always worked on. The internal compass and the support through the difficult things so they can navigate it when they're adults. That's my big thing.
Yeah. Sasha, I'd love to hear like maybe a message from an almost 15-year-old to parents who are feeling just the overwhelm in parenting, feeling like, you know, they're like you were talking about, Sari, how your parents were like, they just were the rulers and then left you alone. Like, what would your advice be to parents who are feeling like they have to be authoritarian, they have to be strict, they have to like fix for their kids, and maybe just give a little bit of like, maybe a little bit of relief or a future projection of how it could be so different if you just, you know, what felt good for you as a kid being parented, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think one really big thing is that they didn't think of it as a problem that needed to be fixed. They thought of it as, oh, okay, so you're feeling this right now. It's not forever going to be a problem. It doesn't need to be, it's not you, it's this moment that is the problem. You're not the problem. This what happened right now is the problem. Like you biting that person, that is a problem. But it's not you that's the problem. It's what you did.
Yeah, language matters. Like I really do think that. Like in Buddhism, they say right speech. So like there's this whole I take a really I really try to teach the kids, like if I had they'll say, oh, I had the worst day. I'll say, well, did you have the worst day or did you have moments in that day that were really hard?
Yes.
Right?
The worst moments, not
The
the
worst
day.
moments, not the worst day.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
like the impermanence that we're all just like moving through these different ups and downs. I think that's something that I've always taught my kids, that like there is not a single state of life. You're not chronically happy, you're not chronically sad, and that it's an evolution of feelings. And then you're going to feel lots of different things during your day, right? And then it's just about like riding that wave in and out, in and out, in and out, and sort of, you know, have a myriad, a spectrum of feelings all day long, every day, 7 days a week for the rest of your life.
For the rest of our lives. I love it. Any final words that you want to put on this, Sasha?
Yeah, maybe one more thing. I think also just loving your kids. That's quite obvious, but I think in general, even if they have sensitivities, instead of being like, ugh, they're so difficult, it's so hard, being like, it's hard, but in a lot of ways it's really rewarding and I love them. And I think not just like kind of writing it off is just like, oh, well, it's just hard and it's just going to be hard and it's just too much. It's too hard.
Again, words matter,
Words
right?
matter.
Yeah.
Like if you're reinforcing your children, telling them how difficult they are, if I would have spent my entire, you know, really 6 months to 6 for Sasha saying how difficult he was to him and how difficult he was to everyone else I was talking to, then
it would have shifted the way
it would have shifted what he thought about himself.
What you thought about me.
Right, because our voice is their inner voice in their head when they're that age.
And I think you also understood, like I had so many sensory sensitivities, like sensory seeking and sensory avoidant. And so you just understood that what I was doing wasn't just like, oh, I was doing it for like to just be bad.
Yeah.
I was doing it because I was overstimulated.
I want to tell you this story. I'm
going
to leave you with this story because I love it. And it's actually one of the biggest imprints on my parenting journey. And I was pregnant with Ethan, my first child, and I was on an airplane and I sat next to probably an 82-year-old woman. And we got to talking and she said to me, she said, oh, you're 9 months pregnant. I said, yeah, I'm 9 months pregnant. I said, I'm about to, 8 months pregnant. She said, I had 7 children.
Oh.
And I said, why? I have 7 children. I said, wow. And she was like 80 pounds, she was this tiny, cute little woman. And I said, you had 7 children in that little tiny person of you? And she said, yeah, it's 7 children. And I said, okay, I have to ask you, I'm about to have a baby, my first baby. What is your best parenting advice? Like, if you could think of anything to tell me, what would you tell me? And she literally looked me in the face and she said, love your kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy. Just love your kids. Love, love, love. With all of your heart, just love your kids. And I swear to God, to this day, I go to that. Just love my kids, love my babies. They're not going to be babies forever. You just got to love your kids.
I love that. And it's so clear, Sasha, that you have felt that unconditional love and connection.
I love you.
I love you too.
So much love. Well,
So
thank
much
you guys so much for being here. This is so
Thank
wonderful.
you for having us. So
Yeah, thank you
fun.
for having us.
I know this is fun. Maybe we'll just have you guys come back and we can rah again.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. I
Anytime.
love it. Thank you guys.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Responsible Parenting Podcast. If you like what you heard, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. If you know someone who would benefit from this podcast, I'd be honored if you'd share this episode with them. Until next time, know that you are enough, you are capable, you've made it through all of your hardest days, and we will keep growing on this parenting journey together. This podcast was produced by Kim Kelty and myself, Becky Jennings, and edited by the Kelty Method, Branding and Podcasting.